So as I said in my last video lecture, today in this video lecture I will cover chapter 13. So I am skipping chapter 12 for this week because chapter 12 is all about monetary policy and it's a very broad topic with a lot of items and topics to discuss. So I want to keep it for next week. Next week we will discuss about lecture 21, which is the monetary policy, and chapter 12. But I wanted to go ahead and finish chapter 13, which is lecture 20, the last lecture of the class in this week, because chapter 13 is basically a summary of all the things that we learned so far from chapter 1 to chapter 12. Okay, so it's kind of gives us a summary and it tries to refresh our memory of what we learned. However, there are certain topics in this chapter that are extensions of what we already learned. Basically, they probably took the topic a little bit further to explain how it works, and to explain and gave more examples so that it's more clear to us. And they came up with probably new concepts also in this chapter. For some which are like branch of the other topics that we already learned. So that's why in this lecture I will only focus on the new stuff. Okay, so the new topics that have been discussed in chapter 13 will only be covered here. Okay, and these new topics will only be included in your exam. It does not mean whatever is covered in chapter 13 from is not included in your exam. Only the new topics that I will cover in this video lecture, as well as what is included in the lecture 22 PowerPoint slide, that those topics will be included in your midterm 2 or midterm 3 or final exams. Okay, so basically, firstly, we know we have to make choices, right? In the very beginning of the course we learned that resources are limited, but our wants are infinite, right? We want a lot of things. We want pretty much everything. If we had the option, we would have got everything, but since resources are limited, we have to make choices. So we are revisiting this topic because it expands on the topic further on chapter 13. So we are all making resource allocation choices. Some choices are small and some are bigger. So in our everyday life we make choices because resources are limited. Whether we want to have pasta for lunch today, or whether we want to have pizza for lunch today, that's also a choice we have to make, right? But choices can also be bigger, like whether we want to be a doctor, or whether we want to be an engineer, or whether I want to study economics, or whether I want to study biology. So because resources are limited, we have to make choices in our everyday life, whether those choices are small or whether those choices are big. Okay, so every choice a person makes is basically an attempt to obtain some type of benefit. So when we are making a choice, let's say today I decide that I want to eat pizza, there's some type of benefit I am expecting to receive by consuming pizza, right? Probably I will feel more satisfied by eating pizza over pasta or Chinese food. So that's why I will choose pizza today, right? So that's my some type of benefits. We make choices that will give us the highest benefit. Okay, so so we make choices in order to increase our benefit, but also we make choices to minimize three things. First is the cost. We want to pay as less as possible, right? In the short run, what must be given up in order to obtain the benefit? So as consumers think, for pizza you want to pay as much less as possible, right? So although when we are making choices as rational human beings, we want to maximize benefit, but we want to minimize the cost in the short run, what we are giving up to obtain the benefit. Then we also want to minimize the uncertainty, right? In the long run, the amount of benefit actually obtained may be less than what we actually perceived. So we want to reduce that uncertainty. Maybe you bought a jacket and you thought it will go, you can use it for 10 years, but after 5 years it's no longer usable, right? So there's certain level of uncertainty there, and we as consumers, when we are making choices, we want to reduce or minimize that uncertainty. Okay, and the other thing we want to minimize is the risk. So basically in the long run, the amount of cost actually paid may be more than what was originally perceived. Again, let's say I buy a Mercedes car and I think, you know, it's a luxury car, and I will not need to repair it as much as a normal car. But after 1 year, maybe might have some maintenance costs that are very expensive that I did not expect. So when we make choices, we want to maximize benefit, but we want to minimize three things. First, cost. That's the what we are giving up now to obtain the benefit. Let's say we pay $5 to obtain a pizza. That $5 is our cost, and we want to minimize it as much as possible. Then we want to minimize our uncertainty. You know, the amount of benefit that we receive, that we expect to come from it may be different. So we want to reduce that uncertainty. We want to know, because information is not available, that's why we have uncertainty. And we also want to reduce risk, okay, because again, information is not available, so maybe the costs that we incur in the long run may be higher than what we have actually perceived. So in short, when we are making choices, we want to maximize benefit, and at the same time we want to minimize cost, we want to minimize uncertainty, and we want to minimize risk. Uncertainty and risk are also known as limited information. Again, think about this. We do not know whether a jacket will, whether the car will have any cost issues within the 5 years or not. That's something unknown. We don't have that information available to us. Again, or let's think about the jacket. We initially thought it will go 10 years, but we don't know if it will go 10 years. It might end up I might end up using only for 5 years because it can start getting torn, right? So we don't have that information. The information we have is limited, so uncertainty and risk are categorized or known as limited information. Whenever you have to make an important choice, it seems like there is never enough good information available, at least not in the present. Maybe as we go on we can get more information, but whenever we are making a choice, we do have some you know, limited information. We probably could have made a better decision if we had all the information, but we always are limited with information. For instance, again, cost of a cheeseburger. Initially we probably pay only $5 for the burger, but after an hour additional costs can arise. Maybe the quality of the meat was not good, and when I ate that cheeseburger, you know, after 1 hour I started to suffer from acidity. You know, so now I have to buy a medicine to reduce that acidity. So there is additional cost arising from there, so which we did not initially expect because of limited information. So that's a perfect example. Like when we are making a choice, we don't have all the information. There is uncertainty, there is risk, and we want to reduce those items. Now, another topic that this slide talks about is trade-off, and that's something new. I don't think we discuss a whole lot about trade-off. What trade-off means is basically there is some trade-off every time when a choice is made. What it means is, in order to increase the amount of benefit, we accept higher cost, or higher cost, risk, and uncertainty, or in order to accept less benefit, or in order to pay low cost, uncertainty, and risk, we are ready to accept low benefit. So again, it can be two scenarios, okay? We want to get the highest benefit, and for that we are going to accept high cost, risk, and uncertainty. That's the trade-off I'm making, because I want to receive highest benefit, and as a trade-off I am paying high cost, I have high certainty, I have high uncertainty, and I have high risk. Okay, now the other scenario can be, in order to pay less cost, less risk, or less uncertainty, I am ready to accept lower benefit. Probably I don't have the affordability to receive the highest choice, so that's why in order to reduce the cost, I am ready to accept lower benefit. So that's trade-off. You know, you're trading off benefit with cost, or you're trading off cost, uncertainty, and risk for benefits. So it can be either of the situations that can happen. Another topic that the chapter 13 talks about is misery index. Basically, it is a type of measure that helps us to give information about unemployment and inflation, and gives a better picture of where the economy is. Okay, so misery index basically combines unemployment rate and inflation rate to understand the overall impact and where the economy is moving. So if you see, the formula for misery index is given by current unemployment rate plus current inflation rate. It basically determines how average citizens are doing economically. When we look at the misery index over the years, we can compare and tell how the average citizens are doing. So let me do a quick example of misery index. Let's say we are given, assume currently unemployment rate is 7.1%, and let's say inflation is 3.2%. So what is the misery index? Misery index is basically unemployment rate plus inflation rate, which is 7.1% plus 3.2%, and that's equals to 10.3%. That is the misery index. Okay, and when we compare this over the years, we can have a better idea of what it means. So basically the curve looks like this. This is year and this is misery. Okay, misery index. So it's like a graph like this. Every year, let's say this is 2001, 2002, 2003, and this portion is unemployment and this portion is inflation. Again, this portion is unemployment, this portion is inflation. So let's say this is 10.2, this is 9.2, this is 11.1. So over the years we can compare and see what portion of misery index is mostly made up of. Is unemployment rate making up most of the misery index, or is inflation rate making up? And over the years, is it going down or is it going up? So that it's a good economic measure that helps us to understand how average citizens are doing in the economy. Basically that's what it needs. It's a good measure that will help us to understand what's going on in the economy. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide, which talks about the Phillips curve. Okay, so Phillips curve is basically, it's a graphical representation that shows us the relationship between unemployment and inflation. Okay, we learned about unemployment and inflation in our previous chapters, but we have not looked into a Phillips curve. It is basically a graph that gives us or tells us how unemployment and inflation are related. So basically there is in general we know inflation and unemployment are inversely related. Okay, now stagflation is a different type of scenario. It's a scenario when inflation and unemployment are both rising, so that's an exception. But in general we have a negative relationship between inflation and unemployment. What that means is, if inflation goes up, unemployment will go down, and if unemployment goes up, inflation will go down. Okay, and vice versa. So basically the graph will look like something like this. Let me draw it here. Let me draw it here. So it's a graph of here we have unemployment. On the x-axis we have unemployment, and on the y-axis we have inflation. And since this is a negative relationship, it looks like a downward sloping curve. Okay, again, if unemployment goes up, inflation is coming down. If inflation is going up, unemployment is going down. So that's the normal scenario. That is how the relationship is given, and this curve is known as the Phillips curve. So you make sure you know that the relationship between inflation and unemployment is given by the Phillips curve, which shows us the negative relationship between these two variables. Now stagflation is an exception, so that's not captured by the Phillips curve. Okay, that's what exactly it is. So that these are the new topics in chapter 13. The rest, if you read through chapter 13, it's all the stuff we already learned about. Classical theory, Keynesian theory, new classical theory. Then it talks about aggregate demand, aggregate supply. Most of these things we already covered. Okay, so this is your lecture 22. We are covering and finishing the new topics in chapter 13, and that should be it for this week. Next week, which is our last class week, after that we will have our final exam. Next week we will basically cover lecture 22, which is monetary policy, and after that we will be done with the course and move ahead for the exams. Okay, so you guys have a good weekend. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or send me a message. Okay, thanks, bye.